So there's been a lot of recent discussion surrounding the Inside Infinite blog about the audio team, and I thought we'd talk about it on the channel. Before we get into it, I just want to clarify, I am not going to be talking about what I think Infinite might possibly sound like. I haven't heard it. None of the rest of the community has heard it. But what we can talk about is what 343 has decided to say about past Halo games, because we have heard those and we can make subjective judgments. And we can compare what they think to what we think. Or more specifically, I can compare what they think to what I think. So we're not going to talk about speculation about, well, is Halo Infinite's music going to sound like this or is it going to sound like this? Instead, we're going to center our discussion around what some folks seem to be upset about with regard to what was said about Halo 4 and Halo 5 scores. So without further ado, let's get into it. When asked about how the music will reflect the spiritual reboot concept in Infinite, audio director Satoru Tajeen answered that the goal is to capture brighter moods, like hope and mystery, as opposed to the heavily story-incorporated scores of 343's past two games. So I'm going to try to parse out what Tajeen means when he says the music of 343's games was story-centric, and I'm going to use it as an excuse to break down some Halo 5 music, at least in terms of how it's implemented in-game. I'm also going to talk about why Halo 4 and 5 needed to take on a different musical approach, and why that is not the fault of the music team. Alright, so let's figure out what Tajeen means by story-driven music. There are two main ways we could interpret this. To start with the more fallible of the two, Diegetic, or in-universe score, is not so unique to Halo 4 and 5, but certainly more prevalent. A great example of this is the Didact's theme from Halo 4, featured in a track called Revival. The chant in this track represents what Chakis and Riser sang during the awakening of the Didact from his first slumber, hundreds of thousands of years prior to the events of the Halo games, as depicted in Halo Cryptum from the Greg Bear book trilogy. About as story-heavy as music can get, I would say. Another example of diegesis would be with Covenant Prayers from Halo 5, which features a male chorus representing Sangheili chanting to keep the Guardian asleep. This diegesis is even more overt during the mission Battle of Sunayon, in which Ungoi can be found praying and singing the same chant, but in their funny little grunt voices, to a holographic icon of the Guardian. There are a number of other examples, but diegetic Halo music deserves its own video. Suffice to say, I don't think anyone is asking for less of this type of music. Now, the other way of incorporating story into the score is by having the music reflect the events of the story, aka what all movies do, or what one might call a cinematic approach. If you don't like this way of doing things for Halo, I have a very strong argument against the popular sentiment of blaming the music direction for the change in musical aesthetic in 343's games. That is, that the music direction is simply supporting the overall project. When considering the overall tone of the music of any game or film, one must crucially also consider its story and the objective of the project as a whole. What I'm saying is that, as is well understood, Halo 4 and Halo 5 Guardians took a different approach to the story, weighing heavier themes and focusing on the internal struggle of Chief and Cortana, as opposed to the themes of heroism and a focus on larger events, as seen in the older games. But the music cannot be to blame for that change to a darker feeling when the whole project is working to create that kind of tone. To imply that Halo 4 and Halo 5 scores didn't support their stories as well as Bungie's would be misguided in my opinion. Let's use the breaking from Halo 5 Guardians for example. This is probably the darkest point in Master Chief's story, where he is forced to confront Cortana's horrible deeds head-on, while simultaneously accompanied by Blue Team charging through relentless waves of Prometheans and the presence of the Warden Eternal. Now, as many may not expressly recall, despite the stakes of this perilous task, the mission does feature a mixture of dark and hopeful tracks, taking on this arc tonally, starting with the foreboding and tragic mood, and peaking at a dramatic high point with one of the best tracks in the franchise, finally coming down to the desperate endpoint where Blue Team is at their lowest again. Let's break this down. As Cortana continues to suppress the Warden as he tries to wear John down morally during the first encounter of the mission, we hear Dominion, a beautiful and tragic piece. Later, as John confronts Cortana about her crimes, we hear a piece with a crying synth lead and emotional brass and strings from the track Osiris Suite Act 4.
What would you have me do?
Tell me the truth. How many people died when you called the Guardians here?
Excuse me?
You know, don't you? The exact body count.
The dialogue in this encounter is all about the death caused across the galaxy by Cortana, juxtaposed against the Warden taunting John. The subsequent part of that same track then plays in the next area, during which the Warden continues to taunt Chief about the futility of his fight, planting the critical seed of doubt for Chief, that he cannot possibly rescue Cortana while also protecting humanity, at least not given her newfound purpose. But this is where things take a turn. Even as the narrative continues to descend into despondence, as Cortana and the Warden begin to explain that they see the created, not humanity, as the true reclaimers and caretakers of the galaxy, the final section of the track Halo Canticles, a tragic spin on the Halo theme, plays, making for a beautiful callback as the Warden references the events of Combat Evolved, which is incredibly reverent of Legacy, by the way, while also relevant to what is happening on screen.
Here on Genesis, it has always been the plan. Come, stand with me one more time, all of you.
Advance routine.
Prometheans just keep coming.
Is this a losing battle?
Only if we intend on losing it.
Like, it's really good. Here we're starting to bring back those old themes, as well as some brighter harmonies and orchestration, including the light upper register of the piano evoking Halo 3's score. This gives way to the true change in tone for the mission. The Trials, the spiritual successor to Halo 3's One Final Effort, plays during this next encounter. This piece too deserves its own video. The Trials is widely regarded as one of the greatest in Halo 5, but its context gets forgotten, it seems. How powerful the choice to inject such hope at such a low point as you fight through these final waves of Prometheans. You're fighting to the tune of the music that carried you through the Warthog run in Halo 3, or onto the beaches of the Silent Cartographer. Some of the most powerful moments in the series, and certainly most memorable and meaningful to longtime fans. How cool is that? From there, the mission culminates in a boss fight with the Warden, followed by the end cutscene featuring the track Blue Team, which reiterates the 117 theme from Halo 4 with a lovely cello solo. Finally concluding with a short phrase from Dominion again, to close out the cinematic and tie a nice bow on the mission.
Goodbye, John.
But with a track like The Trials and the emotional build to it with the preceding excerpt from Halo Canticles, who is to say that Halo 5 is scored without a sense of hope in the face of dark, challenging odds? I laugh at the idea. Compare this to the Bungie Halos. The first three together have a distinctly different kind of storytelling from Halo 4 and 5. Any huge fight is working toward a different sort of goal, something bigger and less personal. The music appropriately reflects this, and overall, the games are indeed a lot brighter. The darkest spots of the Bungie games are anything involving Flood, and the music gets plenty creepy and crunchy in those moments, rest assured. And ODST, for the record, stands completely apart and does not apply here. Now, if you want to talk about a lack of hope, Reach's story represents themes that are almost entirely desperate and hopeless, and the score reflects that with intense grit and darkness. But Reach is praised for its atmosphere. Why? Is it more acceptable because there's no chief? I can't answer that for the community, but I pose the question to you, the viewer. And I restate my thesis that it's not up to the music directors to decide how the music needs to feel. It's up to the project leads. So if you walk away with anything from this video, let it be that it is only up to the music team to interpret into music what the project leads are needing. So place your criticism accordingly. To close this discussion out, I would like to pose a few rhetorical questions. Why would 343 choose this as their messaging about the music approach in their new game? Why tear down their past games? We all know how a portion of the community responded to the Reclaimer Saga games. In light of that, 343 chose to take a different direction. And so far, it's been great. But why justify it for any reason other than because we think it will be cool and we hope you think so too? This approach by 343 to messaging design goals for Halo Infinite is not unique to the discussion about music. A choice has clearly been made across the board to ride a little bit on the goodwill of those who punch down Halo 4 and Halo 5 Guardians and play into those criticisms. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't all that much matter what 343 says about Infinite, as much as what Infinite actually turns out to be. But it would be nice to see them being proud of Infinite on its own 2 feet, rather than in comparison to its predecessors. I'm Noah, and this is Traveling Halo.